Meanwhile, law enforcement officers were promptly dispatched to the hotel room that Cooper had specifically mentioned during his statement. Upon arrival, the officers approached the door cautiously, uncertain of what they might find inside. Once they entered the room, they were met with a disturbing and tragic scene, one that matched Cooper's account in chilling detail. Lying motionless on the floor was a woman, her body concealed beneath a blanket. The evidence strongly suggested that the fatal incident had taken place while the victim was either asleep or in a deeply relaxed, unaware state, offering little to no opportunity for her to defend herself or call for help. The calmness of the surroundings only heightened the sense of tragedy, painting a picture of a life abruptly taken in a moment of vulnerability. Alicia Kimberly Bromfield entered the world on August 28, 1990, in the quiet suburb of Joliet, Illinois. In high school, Alicia had already mapped out her future with a clarity rare for someone her age. She dreamed of pursuing a career in law. At the age of 16, Alicia took her first steps toward independence by getting a job as a florist at a local garden center. The flexible hours gave her the chance to balance work and academics, first at her local high school, then later at a private Catholic academy that offered a more rigorous academic environment. Eventually, she earned admission to Western Illinois University, where she enrolled in the Criminal Justice and Forensic Psychology program. By the time Alicia was in college, she was managing to juggle multiple responsibilities with grace. Through hard work and smart budgeting, she earned enough to pay for both her tuition and her living expenses. Life, at that moment, seemed to be unfolding just as she had envisioned. She was more than a year into her studies, and her goal of earning a degree was well within reach. But during the second semester of her junior year, her life would take an unexpected turn, one that she could never have anticipated. It was during that pivotal time that Alicia crossed paths with a fellow student named Michael. He was also attending Western Illinois University and majoring in economics. They dated for several months, and things initially appeared to be going smoothly. But everything changed in the spring of 2012 when Alicia discovered she was pregnant. The news came as a surprise. Although the pregnancy was unplanned, Alicia didn't respond with fear or hesitation. Instead, she embraced it with a sense of hope and excitement. However, when she shared the news with Michael, the response she received was not one of joy or support. In fact, it was quite the opposite. He told her, in no uncertain terms, that he was not prepared to take on the responsibilities of fatherhood. He made it clear that he had no intention of being involved and even pressured her to end the pregnancy. When Alicia stood her ground and told him she intended to carry the pregnancy to term, he cut off all contact. He refused to provide any support, emotional or financial, and chose to walk away completely. Her parents, seeing her strength and determination, reassured her that she wouldn't have to face motherhood alone. They offered her their unconditional love and promised to help her raise the baby. With their encouragement, Alicia focused on preparing for the arrival of her daughter and planning for the future she had imagined. That summer, during a routine prenatal appointment, Alicia learned she was expecting a baby girl. She had calculated that the timing of her due date would align with the winter break, allowing her time to recover, adjust to motherhood, and prepare for her final semester before graduation. Alicia's work history had always been a point of pride for her. As mentioned earlier, she had been employed at the garden center since she was just 16 years old. It was a place where she had grown both personally and professionally. About 6 months before Alicia started working there, the company had appointed a new regional manager, a man named Brian Cooper, who was 31 years old at the time. As time passed and Alicia matured into a capable and dependable employee, their interactions grew more frequent. Cooper began to rely on her not just for floral work, but for additional tasks. He frequently asked her to help care for his Labrador retriever, even giving her a spare key to his apartment so she could walk the dog when he was out of town. He paid her for these favors, and Alicia, always eager to earn a bit of extra money, appreciated the opportunity. At first, Cooper came across as generous and trustworthy. He complimented Alicia's work ethic, praised her designs, and treated her with what seemed like genuine respect. Alicia, in turn, regarded him as a mentor figure, someone who saw her potential and wanted to help her grow. But gradually, things began to shift. Cooper's behavior, once professional, started to blur boundaries. Eventually, he began suggesting they spend time together outside of work, asking her out to dinner and hinting at wanting a romantic relationship. Although Alicia always tried to remain polite and professional in her responses, it was clear that Cooper's interest had become more than friendly. She found herself navigating an increasingly awkward situation, one where she was unsure how to say no without jeopardizing her job or upsetting someone in a position of authority. At the time, she was pregnant and focused on maintaining stability in her life, so she tried to avoid confrontation, hoping that the dynamic would eventually settle down. What Alicia didn't know was that her attempts to quietly manage the situation would not be enough to prevent what lay ahead. Alicia had always been someone who treated others with kindness and respect. She wasn't the type to raise her voice or create conflict, even when she was clearly uncomfortable. So when Brian Cooper began expressing romantic interest in her, she responded in the only way she knew how, with a polite but firm no. Unfortunately, her reserved and gentle demeanor made it difficult for her to be as assertive as the situation required. While Alicia saw her refusal as clear, Cooper saw it entirely differently. In his mind, this wasn't rejection. It was just a game. This dangerous misunderstanding planted the seeds for something much more troubling. Alicia lacked the confidence at that time to confront him directly and forcefully, especially given his position as her superior at work. She avoided being alone with him, made excuses to steer clear of unnecessary conversations, and stayed close to other co-workers whenever possible. But her attempts at subtle avoidance only seemed to feed Cooper's obsession. It wasn't long before his attitude changed. His tone grew colder, his words sharper. When she made small errors, the kind any employee might make in a fast-paced retail setting, he seized on them, blowing them out of proportion. Cooper's controlling behavior extended beyond comments and criticism. It didn't stop there. Cooper used his authority to assign her to out-of-town work-related trips, some of which she wasn't even qualified for, under the pretense that she was the only one he trusted to handle them. But in reality, these trips were just a way to isolate her further, another excuse to force proximity. Despite her discomfort, she often felt cornered into accepting, fearing the consequences if she said no. He insisted on traveling with her, and while nothing overtly inappropriate happened during those trips, the constant pressure to spend time alone with him was wearing her down emotionally. When Alicia began seeing Michael, the fellow student from her university, Cooper's reaction was immediate and intense. His demeanor became volatile. The coldness turned into open hostility. He started burying her in additional tasks, often giving her assignments that were outside her job description or that required staying late. When she expressed concerns or tried to set boundaries, he lashed out, sometimes in front of customers or other employees. The idea of quitting began to surface more frequently in her mind. She fantasized about walking away, starting over somewhere new, free from the cloud that seemed to follow her at work. But then, her world shifted once again. She found out she was pregnant. Quitting her job no longer felt like a viable option, not when she had rent to pay, tuition to cover, and a baby on the way. The garden center wasn't just a workplace anymore. It was her only means of survival. Then came another shock. When Cooper learned of her pregnancy, instead of backing away, he took an unexpected turn. He made her an offer that left her stunned. He proposed marriage. He claimed he would raise the child as his own and even suggested that Alicia give the baby his last name. She refused once again. But this time, it wasn't just discomfort that guided her decision. It was fear. Cooper no longer felt like a misguided supervisor with an unrequited crush. To Alicia, he was beginning to feel dangerous. Still, she didn't share the full extent of what she was experiencing with those closest to her. She didn't want to burden her parents, who were already stepping in to help raise the child. Now, with just 3 months left until her due date, Alicia came up with a plan. She decided she would endure the toxic environment a little longer, just until her legally protected maternity leave began in the winter. But Cooper wasn't finished. In early August of 2012, he approached her with yet another request, one that felt more like a demand masked as a plea. He asked her to travel with him out of state to attend his sister's wedding in Wisconsin. Alicia immediately said no. She didn't want to spend more time with him outside of work, and certainly not travel several hours to another city. But this time, he changed tactics. Instead of being pushy, he tried to appeal to her empathy. He shared that their father had recently passed away and that he would be walking his sister down the aisle in his place. He spoke about how emotional the day would be for him and claimed he couldn't face it alone. He insisted he needed a friend by his side and promised, sincerely, he claimed, that this would be the last time he ever asked anything of her. Cooper reassured her that everything would be above board. He told her the two of them would be staying at the same hotel as the rest of the wedding party, in separate rooms. He said she would be introduced as just a friend and colleague, nothing more. Alicia, tired, emotionally drained, and wanting to avoid another confrontation, reluctantly agreed. She told herself it was just a weekend, just one event, and then it would be over. The wedding was scheduled for August 18th, in the quiet town of Plainfield, Wisconsin, a location several hours away from her home in Illinois. What Alicia didn't know was that this trip, framed as a simple favor for a co-worker, would be the final chapter in a long and exhausting ordeal. When Alicia told her mother Cheryl about the upcoming trip to Wisconsin for Brian Cooper's sister's wedding, her mother's instincts kicked in immediately. Cheryl had long sensed that something about Cooper wasn't right. Over the years, she had observed subtle red flags, the awkward silences when his name came up, the vague way Alicia spoke about him, and the fact that she never brought him up in the same light as her other co-workers. Cheryl didn't know the full extent of what her daughter had endured at work, but she knew enough to feel deeply uneasy. Although Cheryl voiced her concerns, Alicia reassured her that she would keep her updated throughout the trip. She emphasized that it was just a weekend, just a work obligation she couldn't refuse, and that nothing was going to happen. Cheryl hesitated, but she trusted her daughter's judgment. Before Alicia left, she promised her mother that she would check in often and let her know if anything felt off. In the early morning hours of August 18th, 2012, Brian Cooper arrived to pick up Alicia. The car ride began calmly. They talked casually about the wedding, about work, about school. Cooper kept a composed and friendly demeanor, playing the part of the polite coworker escorting a friend to a family event. It seemed, at least on the surface, like he had decided to respect Alicia's boundaries. But by midday, things took a troubling turn. Alicia placed a phone call to her mother, and her voice was filled with distress. She was upset and overwhelmed, telling Cheryl that she wanted to come home, immediately. She explained that, once again, Cooper had misled her. Contrary to what he had promised, he hadn't booked them rooms at the main hotel where the wedding guests were staying. Instead, he had reserved a room at a secluded lodge several miles away. Worse still, there was only one room, not separate accommodations as he had assured her, but a shared space with a single bed. Alicia felt trapped and betrayed. She had trusted him, again, and he had taken advantage of that trust. When she confronted him, Cooper initially tried to play it off. He told her the primary hotel had been fully booked and that separate rooms were no longer available. He also claimed that reserving 2 suites at the nearby resort had been far too expensive, so he opted for one room with the understanding that it would be temporary and purely logistical. Alicia didn't believe him, but she was exhausted and didn't want to cause a scene, especially not on the day of someone else's wedding. Cooper used her empathy against her, appealing to her sense of guilt by reminding her how important the day was for his sister and how much stress the family was already under. He begged her not to ruin it by leaving early or getting upset. He said he understood her discomfort and promised to respect her personal space. Once again, Alicia relented, but this time, she established clear terms. She told Cooper firmly that he would be sleeping on the couch. She would take the bed. She also made it clear that once they returned home, their personal connection, whatever remained of it, would be severed entirely. She told him that she no longer wished to be friends or have any social contact beyond what was required for work. Cooper appeared to agree. He nodded, said he understood, and didn't argue. At the time, Alicia believed the matter was settled. Later that day, the wedding took place without incident. Cooper fulfilled his role, walking his sister down the aisle and participating in the ceremony. During the reception, he and Alicia sat at the same table, but they barely spoke. He was withdrawn, drinking heavily, but not causing a scene. He kept to himself, interacting only when necessary. There were no public arguments, no tension visible to the other guests, just silence. After the reception, Cooper drove Alicia back to the resort hotel. Nothing seemed unusual. The drive was quiet. He didn't press her to talk, and Alicia, while still uncomfortable, was relieved that the day was nearly over. The following morning, August 19th, at approximately 9 a.m., a man walked into a small grocery store connected to a roadside gas station not far from the resort. His clothing was damp, his hair matted, and he looked as if he had been out in the early morning rain. Calmly, he approached one of the store employees and asked to use the phone. When the call connected, he spoke to the dispatcher in an even, emotionless tone. He said he needed to report an incident that had taken place earlier that morning, one in which he was directly involved. He identified himself and stated that he had taken the life of a woman, his coworker, in a hotel room nearby. When the operator asked if it had been an accident, he responded without hesitation. "No," he said. "It was intentional." He offered no emotion, no justification. Then, as if to excuse his actions, he added that he considered himself a good person, that this wasn't who he truly was. After placing the call, the man Brian Cooper sat down quietly at a table near the front of the store. He didn't attempt to leave, didn't resist. When law enforcement arrived, he calmly held out his hands to be placed in handcuffs and quietly followed the officers to the patrol vehicle. Meanwhile, police were dispatched to the hotel room Cooper had referenced. Upon entry, they found the scene exactly as he had described. A woman was lying on the floor, covered with a blanket. The medical examiner later determined that the cause of death was mechanical asphyxiation. It appeared that the incident had occurred suddenly, likely while the victim was asleep or completely unaware. From the moment Cooper was taken into custody, he was forthcoming. He did not attempt to deny what had happened. It was a disturbing contrast to the events he described. When detectives asked him why he had committed the act, Cooper gave a chillingly shallow response. He claimed that after the wedding, he and Alicia had an argument in the hotel room. She had hurt his pride, he said, by reiterating that she no longer wanted to be friends, that their relationship, whatever it once was over for good. He said her rejection left him feeling embarrassed and angry, and that he drank to dull the pain. According to him, those emotions festered into something dark. He admitted that part of his motivation had been driven by a desire to see her without clothes, a statement that investigators would later describe as cold and detached. He painted himself as a man whose ego had been bruised, whose feelings had been hurt, attempting to frame what happened as the result of emotional turmoil rather than premeditation. Cooper also told investigators a story that was quickly disproven. He claimed that he and Alicia had once been romantically involved, that they had shared many joyful moments, and that she had later betrayed him. According to his version of events, Alicia had mocked him, laughed at him, and deliberately humiliated him during the trip. He said she had only agreed to attend the wedding to hurt him emotionally. Cooper consumed one drink after another, fueling a toxic mix of resentment, jealousy, and wounded pride. Bartenders later recalled that while he wasn't loud or disruptive, something in his eyes seemed off, like he was lost in his own head, disconnected from the celebration around him. Eventually, in the early morning hours, Cooper returned to their room. Alicia was already asleep, unaware of the emotional storm raging within him. Instead of lying down or preparing for bed, Cooper stepped out onto the balcony, gazing into the dark night. Thoughts swirled violently in his mind, grievances, imagined slights, feelings of rejection that festered over the course of the day. The alcohol blurred the lines between logic and emotion, further amplifying the sense that he had been wronged and that someone needed to pay for it. Finishing the last of the liquor he'd brought up from the bar, Cooper quietly walked back into the dimly lit room. He stood silently over Alicia, watching her sleep, his mind overtaken by thoughts that had shifted from frustration to something darker. Her eyes blinked open, and she immediately saw him looming over her. In a calm, cautious voice, she asked what he was doing. Cooper deflected her concern with a strange suggestion that they should go out together once they returned home. That simple rejection, that one word, no, was more than his fragile pride could handle. At that moment, all self-control vanished. Without warning, he launched at her, wrapping his hands tightly around her neck. Alicia fought back with everything she had. Despite being caught off guard, she tried to resist, struggling to break free. The struggle was brief, and tragically, it ended with Alicia losing consciousness, never to wake again. Once the horrifying act was done, Cooper didn't flee in panic. Instead, he sat quietly next to her for some time, seemingly consumed by an eerie stillness. At some point, he covered her body with a blanket, later claiming he did so out of respect, saying she wouldn't have wanted to be seen that way. It was a strange contradiction, the same man who had taken her life now trying to preserve some twisted version of dignity. Rather than facing what he had done, Cooper initially contemplated end all. But instead, he wandered aimlessly until he found himself walking along a road near a small gas station and convenience store. There, he entered the attached grocery area, his clothes still damp from the rain or early morning dew. He calmly approached a store clerk and asked to use the phone. Then, with no visible emotion, he called emergency services and admitted to what had happened. Further investigation revealed that this was not the first time Cooper had exhibited troubling behavior toward women. Although he had no formal criminal record, former co-workers described him as aggressive and emotionally unstable. One young woman who had worked at the same garden center before Alicia shared that she too had been harassed by Cooper. She reported his behavior to management, but when no action was taken, she made the difficult decision to leave her job. Alicia, unlike her predecessor, refused to walk away quietly. She formally reported Cooper's inappropriate behavior multiple times. Despite her detailed complaints, nothing was done. As a regional manager, Cooper was seen as valuable. His performance metrics were strong, and he maintained a professional facade in front of upper management. Instead of facing discipline, he was granted paid leave and casually advised to consider anger management classes. No one followed up to ensure he attended. Even when Alicia warned that she might go to the authorities if the harassment continued, the company's response was minimal. The pattern was clear: protect the manager, silence the complaints, and preserve the company's image. After his initial confession, Cooper later attempted to shift his defense. He entered a plea of not guilty, citing intoxication as the reason for his actions. His legal team argued that he had been so heavily under the influence that night that he wasn't capable of making rational decisions. They claimed his behavior was not premeditated, but instead the tragic result of impaired thinking. The prosecution, however, pushed back hard against that claim. They highlighted the detailed timeline Cooper had provided and his ability to recall even minor events of the night. If he had been truly incapacitated, they argued, he wouldn't have remembered everything so clearly. Nor would he have managed to cover Alicia's body, walk to a gas station, or calmly dial 911. The trial proved complex. Although the facts were clear, the legal arguments around intoxication created uncertainty. The jury ultimately failed to reach a unanimous verdict. 2 jurors held the belief that his level of intoxication might have reduced his responsibility. While awaiting a retrial, Alicia's mother, Cheryl Bromfield, transformed her grief into action. Determined that no other family would endure such a legal loophole, she began advocating for changes to the state law. Cheryl launched petitions, met with lawmakers, and raised public awareness about the dangers of allowing voluntary intoxication to be used as a defense in violent crimes. Her advocacy paid off. In April 2014, new legislation was signed into law, closing the loophole and ensuring that voluntary intoxication could no longer be used to excuse or lessen responsibility in cases involving serious harm or loss of life. In May of that same year, Cooper's retrial began. This time, the jury returned a clear and unanimous verdict. He was found guilty on all counts. The court sentenced him to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, for the devastating loss of Alicia and the unborn child she had so lovingly anticipated.